The purpose of this video is to teach you how our bodies control and regulate the strength of our muscle contractions. As a quick reminder, a neuromuscular junction is the place where a nerve meets a muscle. When an action potential reaches the terminal bud as it travels down the axon, it will eventually reach the terminal bud. As it gets to that terminal bud, what will occur, as you recall, is an influx of calcium into the axon. This will cause the synaptic vesicles containing the neurotransmitter acetylcholine to fuse with the membrane of the axon terminal, and those vesicles will release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine into this synapse. Okay, this synapse right here is meeting up with what's called the motor end plate of our muscle cell. The motor end plate is where our terminal bud meets the muscle. We find this region of the sarcolemma that's got all these infoldings, and on those infoldings we would find all of the receptors for the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. The binding of acetylcholine to those receptor proteins located in the motor end plate will, of course, stimulate an action potential to be sent along the sarcolemma that will eventually travel down the T tubules and stimulate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which we see here and here, to release calcium into our myofibrils, stimulating the contraction of a muscle. Now, a single action potential from a motor neuron can cause a single rapid contraction and relaxation of a muscle fiber or group of muscle fibers that is called a twitch. A twitch really doesn't do very much work, but it has three distinct phases or periods. The first is referred to as the latent phase or latent period, which is the time from the arrival of the stimulus until the time the muscle begins to shorten. This takes about 2 milliseconds to occur. The events that occur during those 2 milliseconds are depolarization of the sarcolemma, so we get depolarization, pardon my terrible handwriting here, of the sarcolemma. We get diffusion of calcium out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm, and binding of the myosin heads to actin. And all of that activity takes place in 2 milliseconds. Let me fix my spelling here real quick. Myosin to actin. Okay? And so that all of that occurs during the latent period. The second phase or period of a muscle twitch is referred to as the contraction phase or contraction period. And during this time, we see tension and shortening of our muscle. This time period takes anywhere from 10 to 100 milliseconds depending upon the muscle. The final phase or period of a muscle twitch is referred to as the relaxation phase or period, which is when the muscle goes back to its resting state. Okay, so during the period of relaxation, we go back to our resting state. And in order for this to happen, what has to happen is the calcium that's present in the sarcoplasm has to be actively transported back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That causes the calcium to no longer be attached to troponin, so tropomyosin covers up actin, and myosin cannot bind to our actin anymore. This period again takes about 10 to 100 milliseconds. And my guess is that you're all probably familiar with the phenomenon of your muscles being able to contract a little more strongly after they've been warmed up than they can initially whenever you start working out. This phenomenon is referred to as trepa and can be kind of explained by the fact that when we are warming our muscles up, what happens is they get stimulated and then allowed to completely relax, and then stimulated again and completely relax, and stimulated again and completely relax over and over and over again. And so this trepa effect is also called the staircase effect because the muscle actually steps up its strength with each contraction. Now the question is, why does that happen? Why does contraction followed by complete relaxation followed by contraction, complete relaxation, etc. lead to this increase in muscle contraction strength or muscle tension that we see represented in our graph right here? Okay. Well, what happens is that as we contract and relax the muscle, there is a progressive buildup of calcium in the sarcoplasm. Remember, the sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm of a muscle cell. And the reason for this buildup is that the stimuli coming into the muscle that cause it to release calcium from its sarcoplasmic reticulum come in faster than the calcium that was released from the previous stimulus can be pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum during the relaxation period. That means the troponin has calcium continually bound to it, leaving binding sites for myosin heads exposed so that the muscle can keep contracting, and with every successive stimulus, the contraction is a little bit stronger. Eventually what happens, the reason that you see this leveling off here, right in this area right here, and the muscles contractions don't get any stronger, is that the inflow and outflow of calcium equalizes, and the strength of the contraction that we see here over time does eventually level off. My guess is you guys are also aware that you can increase the strength of a muscle contraction as you are working out. For example, if you're sitting there watching this video right now, you could flex your biceps and squeeze it harder and harder and harder and make it contract more and more and more. The question is, how is that happening? All right. Well, there's basically two ways in which the strength of a muscle contraction is increased. One of those methods is called wave summation, and that's what we see represented in this graph that we have right here. And in wave summation, the frequency of the stimulation of our muscle fibers is increased over time. So the frequency of our stimulus is increased over time. Notice right here, we never actually reach full relaxation between each stimulus. So the muscle is stimulated to contract here, and then it's allowed to relax, coming back down, but not completely relax. And then it's stimulated again and comes back down, but then it's stimulated again and comes back down. If the muscle fibers are stimulated at a rate where they partially relax and then are stimulated again and partially relax and are stimulated again and partially relax and stimulated again, they are said to be in incomplete or unfused tetanus, as we see here. If, however, the muscle fibers do not relax at all between stimuli, as we see represented here, then they are said to be in complete or fused tetanus. In real life, this very rarely ever happens. One example might be if somebody has a big log laying on top of their friend and they try to lift it up off of them, or if somebody's trapped underneath a car and somebody is able to lift that car up off of the person. That might be an example of when the muscles being used to lift that particular weight are completely stimulated and not allowed to relax. Another method that's used to stimulate or increase the strength of contractions of muscles is through the use of something called a motor unit. And so what we see here represented in this particular picture is a motor unit. A motor unit includes the motor neuron, like we see here in purple, that I just tried to trace a little bit, not so successfully, and all of the muscle fibers that it stimulates. So we can see that this purple neuron stimulates this muscle fiber here and this muscle fiber here. So that would be the motor unit, would be that purple nerve fiber and the two muscle fibers that it stimulates. And we have a second motor unit going to this same muscle right here in red that stimulates these muscle fibers here. So that's a second motor unit. And a way that we can actually increase the strength of a muscle contraction involves using multiple motor units. So in what is called motor unit recruitment, more and more motor neurons that stimulate the muscle fibers of one particular muscle are activated, which stimulates more muscle fibers to contract, leading to a stronger muscle contraction. So for example, here there are 3 motor neurons, and if just the red one were stimulated, then only the muscle fibers that red motor neuron stimulates would contract. But now if we added a second motor neuron, like this blue one in the middle, and its muscle fibers to what is already contracted from the red motor neuron causing its muscle fibers to contract, we would get more and more muscle fibers contracting and a much stronger overall contraction of the muscle. And when a contraction occurs and there's no appreciable shortening of the muscle, it's referred to as an isometric contraction. So some examples of isometric contractions would be holding weights in a stationary position, pushing against a wall, holding a plank position. All of those are examples of isometric contractions. When a contraction occurs and the muscle shortens while the force of contraction is constant, it's called an isotonic contraction, as you can see right here. And an example of an isotonic contraction would be doing curls, for example. And we also often hear about something called muscle tone. And muscle tone is the continual partial contractions of muscles that give firmness to relaxed muscle and help us maintain posture. What causes these partial contractions of the muscle? Well, at any one moment, a small number of muscle fibers, as we see here, at any one moment, a small number of total fibers in a muscle contract, producing a tautness of the muscle rather than recognizable contraction and movement. So we don't actually see a flexing or an extending. We just know that we can look at somebody and see a little bit of muscle. And this is caused by involuntary activation of some motor units. Okay, and when we would notice people losing muscle tone, for example, would be if they have some sort of nerve injury to one of their motor nerves, so they have no motor connection to a particular muscle. That muscle will no longer be getting those small stimulations, and it will atrophy over time. Now, a topic that I would guess that a lot of the athletes in class would be interested in is the topic of slow versus fast twitch muscles and muscle fibers. Okay, some muscle fibers are specialized for endurance and resist fatigue. They're usually supplied with oxygen by large amounts of capillaries. They have a lot of mitochondria and an abundant supply of an oxygen-storing molecule called myoglobin. Myoglobin is related to hemoglobin, and it does a very similar job to hemoglobin. We know that hemoglobin carries oxygen around our blood. Myoglobin, again, we see the prefix myo here, so we know we're talking about muscles. Myoglobin is a molecule found in our muscle cells that stores oxygen in the muscle. Now, these particular muscles that have large amounts of myoglobin, that have lots of mitochondria, and lots of capillaries going to them, contract slowly. And that's generally because their myosin heads split ATP at a slow rate. And remember, the splitting of ATP is what allows those myosin heads to cock backwards and then move up and attach to our actin filaments. And that happens relatively slowly. So these particular muscle fibers with lots of mitochondria, with myoglobin, and a large amount of capillaries supplying them are referred to as slow twitch fibers. Slow twitch fibers, and we see right here, slow twitch fibers, are generally red in appearance due to the abundance of capillaries and myoglobin, which is a reddish-brown molecule. Muscles that are in your back that help to maintain posture, and the soleus muscle of the lower leg are mainly made up of slow twitch fibers. Another example of a place that you're probably familiar with where there's lots of slow twitch fibers would be the leg meat in chicken that is red in appearance due to the large amount of slow twitch fibers, since chicken legs are for endurance running. Right? That's what chickens use their legs for. We have other muscle fibers in our bodies that are specialized for quick anaerobic power type activities that you see over here, anaerobic and explosive power, right? They have less myoglobin, so these don't have very much myoglobin over here, these fast twitch fibers, and they have fewer capillaries feeding them oxygen as well. These are generally anaerobic, which means they don't use oxygen as a supply for cell respiration to help generate ATP. These contract quickly, these fast twitch fibers, as the name would suggest, contract quickly because they split ATP much more quickly. They also fatigue very quickly because they don't have a very large oxygen supply and are going through anaerobic respiration rather than aerobic. Muscles in the arms are mostly fast twitch muscles. Chicken breast muscle is used for short flight, if any flight at all, and is mostly fast twitch, which is why it's white in appearance. We don't have very many capillaries in it. You don't have that red molecule myoglobin in those cells, so it appears white. So here's a question for you to ponder. What type of meat would you expect to find in the breast of a migratory duck that flies long distances, and why would you expect that? We can talk about that in class later. And an interesting note, I think, for you athletes is that the number of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers, that ratio of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers, is actually hereditary. Conditioning and training does nothing to change that ratio. At least that's what we believe. There are some recent studies that may contradict that idea, but most people believe that conditioning and training really doesn't do anything to change the ratio of slow twitch to fast twitch fibers. There was a distance runner named Alberto Salazar who won the New York City Marathon every year from 1980 to 1982, and he also won the Boston Marathon in 1982 by out-sprinting another guy to the finish line. And then after he finished, he collapsed and was rushed to the hospital because he hadn't drank anything for the entire marathon. He now works for Nike, actually. But a muscle biopsy was done on Alberto Salazar, which means a little section of his muscle was taken and put under a microscope, and it was found that his muscle fiber, his slow twitch to fast twitch muscle fiber ratio was 92% slow twitch to 8% fast twitch. Most people are down in like the 60% slow to 40% fast twitch range. Although when his slow twitch fibers were studied, it was determined that they contracted at the speed of the average person's fast twitch fibers, which means he could run long distances very fast because he had these slow twitch fibers that were designed for endurance and didn't fatigue easily, but they contracted faster than the normal person's slow twitch fibers did, which would explain why he was able to run these marathons really, really quickly. So that's it. I hope you guys learned a little bit about muscle contraction, and if you have any questions, we can certainly go over those in class.